The NUFC Thursday show, and on today's episode we're going to be looking at the latest in the Marc Guehi saga, possible alternatives for the Crystal Palace defender, and Kieran Trippier's future. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to the NUFC Thursday show, the final NUFC Thursday show and the final transfer news video of the summer. If you haven't seen already, this is the last video I'll be doing of the summer because I'm taking a 2-week break because I'm going to the Paralympics in Paris tomorrow. But there's been plenty of lives, there's been plenty of talk about players and what the situation is in Newcastle United. If you want to check it all out, it's all in a playlist. There's also some lives that I've talked in detail about where Newcastle are, including last night over 500 views on the latest transfer live that I did yesterday. Thanks so much to everyone who joined in. Thanks so much to everyone who gave me questions. Thanks so much for everyone who interacted and helped grow the channel as well. If you haven't already, please continue to like, share and subscribe. If everyone who views this video hits that thumbs up, it helps the channel grow. It helps me be able to do more of these videos and get stuck into the season once I'm back from Paris. But yeah, in this final episode we're going to be looking at what is quite a busy period at Newcastle United. It feels like everything is finally ramping up, and a lot of people have been concerned about the lack of noise, concerned about how long certain transfer situations have been going on. I called Marc Guehi a saga there in the intro, so I think we'll start with Guehi. Reports from The Telegraph this morning and Sky Sports, so Mike McGrath and Keith Downey this morning, saying that the deal is edging closer, it's getting there a little bit, but I think we are at a position where we need to stop listening to the running commentary of this, because it's been dictated by Crystal Palace, it's been dictated by Steve Parish. Newcastle have been in consistent conversation with Palace over Guehi. Guehi is keen on the move, he's not going to sign a new contract. All of these things I've said on previous shows, I've said on the lives. I think the way that Newcastle fans need to look at this is in context. Look at the fact that Newcastle is still at the table, the fact that Guehi is still keen, the fact that Palace are still talking, as I've said before. These conversations aren't happening over fax machines, they're not happening over individual calls, they're not happening over like official bids going in that sort of sense. It doesn't feel, it isn't that type of thing. These transfer negotiations are much more informal, they're much more fluid, they're much more conversational, and I think that you get the idea that Newcastle are in a ballpark figure. They've offered around 60 million plus 5. The reports are that it's now 70 million, 65 plus 5 that'll get the deal done. I would imagine at this stage, by the sounds of it, it does feel like it's heading in that direction. The news that Joachim Andersen going to Fulham, a lot of people seem to suggest that they thought that was it for the Guehi deal, and Parish has said in public it would mean that it's difficult to sell both of them, but it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And as I said this, I thought it is more difficult, and that's why we've discussed alternatives. We discussed the likes of Ousmane Diomande on the Monday show. I'll link that into the description. It's still very relevant now. Edmond Tapsoba, who we'll get on to in a minute. We spoke about him on the live stream. Axel Disasi's been linked again, who Paul Mitchell knows from his time at Monaco. So there's lots of different options out there. The fact that they're still at the table for Guehi, the fact that Palace were even talking about Guehi at the same time as talking about Anderson suggests that they are ready to sell. The suggestion from Sky is that Palace have quietly acknowledged that it is right to sell him this summer. I think that's been the case all summer. That's why Newcastle have not left the table. If Palace were really as bullish as they've been in public in these conversations, I think Newcastle would have moved on a long time ago. I think they've been much more receptive because they know they're in a weak position. I've said this so many times. Their position is very weak. He's got 2 years left in his contract. He's not going to sign another one. This sort of deal is, they are acting like he's got 3 or 4 years on his contract and he's open to signing another one. Those two things give Palace a weak situation, but also the fact that it is their prerogative, that he is their player for 2 years. If they're okay with losing potential value on him, then they can do this, and they've acted like that. But at the same time, I think that they know that Newcastle aren't going anywhere. They know Newcastle are interested, and they know that they can get at least 60, 65 out of this deal. And I think that this one will probably happen. It's always been my gut feeling, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it definitely will. And as I said on my live stream yesterday, we'll get onto it in a minute. Now that Edmond Tapsoba's name is in the sphere, don't get bogged down in the narrative that and a lot of people have, that Marc Guehi is the only thing that's going on, and now that Tapsoba has been talked about, that Guehi is off the table, it doesn't mean that. Lots of things happen concurrently. As I say, these situations are very fluid. They're a lot less formal than they come across in the media, and I think that's the way that Parish and Crystal Palace have put this in the media. It gives the suggestion that they are in control of this, where, as I say, it's a much more fluid situation. The conversations happening all the time, ballpark figures discussed that Newcastle are receptive of, and I think ultimately at this stage it sounds like it could happen. But if it doesn't, we'll talk about Edmond Tapsoba now. This is the sort of difference between Palace and Bayer Leverkusen. Bayer Leverkusen do not want to sell Edmond Tapsoba. He's a crucial part of that team that Xabi Alonso's built, played in a really solid back three last season, helped them obviously win the Bundesliga. I mentioned his name earlier this summer and sort of dismissed it because I thought his value would have gone up. The fact that he's still apparently cheaper than Guehi is something, but I think Leverkusen are in a powerful position in terms of not wanting to sell him. He's got a long-term contract there. They've just got Champions League football. Newcastle don't have any European football to offer. He was on their list last summer. He's a player that they definitely like. Their interest is obviously clear because, as I mentioned, if you go right back to the start of my channel, on the second or third video, I think I mentioned his name. So Tapsoba is a player that Newcastle like, and as I say, if he was to join, he would be a real coup, especially if he's considerably cheaper than Guehi. He wasn't on my video on Monday because, as I said, I haven't thought this one would be a go. I still have doubts as to whether Leverkusen would be willing to sell him. The only situation is that Newcastle have opened talks and discussed it. There's nothing on terms of what Leverkusen would want in return and not what Leverkusen are open to. But some people I've spoken to in Germany have suggested, as I believe the case to be, that Leverkusen don't want to sell. There's no need to sell. They've got Champions League football, and I don't think he's going to push for this deal. So I think this one is unlikely to happen. But if he certainly were to join, he would be an absolutely brilliant deal, especially if he's cheaper than Guehi, because he allows Newcastle to look at right-winger situations. Now, the right winger situation is still fluid as well. As I say, the thing you need to remember, the running theme of this last few days of the window is nuance and fluidity. Lots of people are joining two camps, and as I said on my live stream yesterday, they're either in the camp that Newcastle have had a failed window and it's a disaster, they're not going to sign anyone, or it's okay if they don't sign anyone. Personally, my view is it would be disastrous if they didn't sign anyone, but there's still 8 days left of the window and they've got money to spend. I think that is definitely something to consider. Tapsoba is unlikely. Guehi is becoming a lot more likely in that sense, but I think that there's still a very fluid situation. Axel Disasi's name's been mentioned, another player Newcastle were heavily linked with last season before he moved to Chelsea. And obviously we know that Paul Mitchell knows him from Monaco. So there's lots of things in the air. Chalobah has been mentioned. Gomez has been mentioned as well. There's plenty of things moving around, but I think the fact that the Guehi deal is getting closer suggests that is still very much their main focus. I don't think that's ever wavered, and I think that's why my confidence that this deal was still on the table never wavered as well, because Newcastle have stayed at the table. And as I say, if Newcastle were as weak in the negotiations as they appear to look from the outside, given what Palace have said, I think they'd have walked away a long time ago. So I think that this is a much more fluid and a much more open situation. They also have a bid on the table for Maxence Lacroix from Wolfsburg. There's also lots of things going on there. So I think that both Tapsoba and there's also Kasunu as well has been linked with both clubs from Leverkusen too. But ultimately, Guehi is looking more likely purely because the Newcastle is still at the table and Palace's situation just isn't as strong as they seem to let it on to be. The final thing I want to talk about is Kieran Trippier. Now, there's reports from The Athletic, from David Ornstein this morning, that he wants to leave and Everton are interested in taking him on loan. The cloud around Kieran Trippier's future has been there for probably about a year, really. I mean, certainly since January when Bayern Munich were interested, but there's been a sort of thing of whether he would be replaced. I think Tino Livramento coming in at the start of last season would have been the beginning of the end from his perspective. I think that has been clearly accelerated this season because Tino Livramento played last week. He then played in the midweek for the under-21s against Sunderland. As I say, for me, looking at that was purely just about training, but also I can understand why people might see that as something a bit different. He's lost the captaincy to Bruno Guimaraes as well, which is quite a big thing for him. And I think he probably looks at this and says, I want to play a lot of football before the end of my career, and I'm going to go and try and find that elsewhere. West Ham inquired about him. Obviously, they've gone and got Wan-Bissaka now. That's not likely to happen in terms of regular first-team football. But Everton is a very interesting situation because they've got Seamus Coleman there, who himself has passed his best. I think they could get a couple of good years out of Trippier in that sense, but the biggest thing is he's best friends with Jordan Pickford, and also he's still very, very good friends and got a very good relationship with Sean Dyche from his days at Burnley. He mentioned Sean Dyche on a couple of podcasts the last couple of years to suggest that he still keeps in touch with him. He still talked to him when he was out in Madrid, for example, at Atletico. So lots of things like that can add up in these situations, and I think that there is definitely something in this sort of Trippier thing, and it would be a shame to lose him. I think there's a lot of dismissals, and I've come out in defence of Miguel Almiron before. I think I need to do the same thing for Kieran Trippier. It's not nearly as vitriolic, but lots of people are sort of saying that it wouldn't matter if he goes. It might well be time for him to leave the first team picture with Tino Livramento coming through, but he absolutely would offer something in terms of leadership strength, in terms of a lot of quality off the bench, in terms of another option at right back when Newcastle don't have that much cover in terms of quality. If he leaves, it would be a shame if he left, I think, for the squad depth. But also, he offers something in terms of set pieces, in terms of leadership that's quite unique, that I think is not easy to find elsewhere. So I think, apart from anything else, he deserves that recognition, but also he also deserves recognition as being the main driving force for this era, because he was the first signing that came in when Newcastle were looking like they were definitely going to get relegated. They needed somebody to be the standard bearer, to make a big difference right from the very start, and he became that leader that he wasn't necessarily at Tottenham or even at Atletico really, and even in England. He's become a massive leader while at Newcastle, and that's because he's led from the front. He came in at a very difficult time, believed in the project, and Newcastle have reaped the rewards of having him, certainly at his very best for 18 months, but certainly I think he has something to offer if he does stay. It'd be a shame to see him go, but he deserves everything in terms of amount of credit for what he brought in that first few that first couple of years, really. I mean, the first half season when he scored those free kicks against Everton and Villa. I always remember the Cambridge game and his debut when Newcastle had lost. Everyone had come off the pitch. He dragged players back onto the pitch to go and applaud the fans. It's all those little things that don't necessarily sound like a major things. And I've spoken to him, as I've said a few times in the Mix Zone, there are very few players who have done more for Newcastle United in modern times than Kieran Trippier. And if he does go, it would be an absolutely huge shame. But I think for his demands of first team football, I think he's more likely to find that elsewhere. Thanks very much for joining me on this final episode of the NUFC Thursday show, the final weekly transfer update. Thanks so much, as I say, for all of your support this summer. Please continue to like, share and subscribe. I'm hoping that there might be a couple of videos if I could get some time to film something while I'm out in Paris, but I'm not sure I can guarantee that. So I'll definitely be back after the 9th of September when I return to talk about all of the football that's happening, maybe give a roundup of where I think Newcastle are before I go back into the weekly content as well. There'll be so much more to come, so please continue to like, share and subscribe. Please continue to support the channel while I'm gone, and yeah, I'll see you when I'm back. Cheers.